Dr. Ilyara Vess had been documenting the Gravethorn for 11 years before the human arrived, and in all that time, she had never once seen the creature hesitate. The bull stood 9 feet at the shoulder, slate-gray hide ridged with calcified bone plates that grew denser each molt, a crest of black quills running from skull to tail tip, and a jaw designed, not adapted, designed, as though some architect of cruelty had drafted the specifications, to close with enough force to shear a field crawler's axle clean through. It weighed more than the shuttle that had carried her to this valley. It had killed 2 research drones, 1 assistant, and a survey fence that the Kalori Science Ministry had billed as indestructible. The ministry had stopped billing things as indestructible after that. On the morning Marin Cade walked down the gravel track from the landing pad with a duffel bag over one shoulder and a cup of something steaming in her other hand, the bull Gravethorn lifted its head from the carcass of a plains runner it had been methodically disassembling and watched her cross the yard. Ilyara was on the observation platform 40 meters away. She keyed her recorder. Field note, day 4012. A human female has arrived at the station. Mid-40s, short hair, no visible armament, no escort. She is walking directly toward Pen 7. The bull is watching her. The bull's quills are rising. She is not stopping. The bull's quills fanned wide. The jaw cracked open, a low grinding noise rolling from the base of its throat like stone plates shifting in a quake. Every Kalori field hand in the yard dropped what they were holding and ran. The 2 nearest the pen gate sprinted for the bunker hatch. The perimeter alarm tripped, not because of the bull, which was a known quantity, but because 3 field hands had crossed the motion grid at a dead run, which the system interpreted as a stampede event. Red light swept the compound. Ilyara's finger hovered over the emergency beacon. Marin Cade stopped 3 meters from the fence. She looked at the bull. The bull looked at her. The grinding noise continued, a vibration Ilyara could feel through the platform's steel deck plating 40 meters out. "Hey," the human said. She took a sip from her cup. "You're big." The bull's quills settled, not slowly, not in stages. All at once, the full crest collapsing like a field of grass pressed flat by wind. It closed its jaw. It blinked both membranes, the clear one first and then the opaque, and then it lowered its head and went back to eating. Ilyara forgot to breathe for 4 seconds. She timed it later on the recorder playback. The alarm was still cycling red across the yard. Nobody had turned it off. Nobody was willing to move close enough to the console. That was 11 months ago. Ilyara stood now at the edge of the homestead's main compound, watching Marin Cade do something that 11 years of xenobiology had told her was categorically impossible. The human was inside the pen, not observing from the platform, not monitoring through the drone feed, inside, past the gate, on the ground, sitting on a flat stone with the bull Gravethorn lying behind her like a wall of bone and quill. The beast's massive head was resting on its foreclaws, one eye half closed, the other tracking the 3 cubs tumbling across the dirt at Marin's feet with the unhurried attention of something that had no natural predator and knew it. The cubs, that was the part that had rewritten Ilyara's career. Gravethorns did not breed in proximity to other sentient species. Every published study, including 2 of Ilyara's own, one of which had earned her the ministry's distinction for fieldwork, stated this as settled biological fact. The presence of non-Gravethorn biological signatures within 600 meters of a denning site triggered a territorial aggression cascade so severe that 3 separate observation programs across 2 continents had been abandoned after losing equipment, personnel, or both. The Kalori Science Ministry had classified the species as a Category 9, the highest containment rating in the Xenofauna Registry, reserved for creatures that could not be safely studied at any distance the ministry's liability actuaries considered reasonable. And here were 3 cubs, 8 weeks old, rolling in the dirt around a human woman who was peeling some kind of orange fruit and handing pieces to the smallest one. Field note day 4347, Ilyara murmured into her collar recorder. Her voice was steady, her hands were not. The cubs are feeding from the human's hand, the bull is resting. The dam is, she looked up. The dam, slightly smaller than the bull but faster and with a crest of pale quills that rattled like dry reeds when she moved, was standing at the far end of the pen watching Ilyara. Not watching Marin, not watching the cubs, watching Ilyara. The dam is monitoring me. Assessment. I remain the threat variable in this scenario. The human does not register as one. She was still trying to process how that could be true. The first month had been the worst. Not because of danger, though there had been danger, the kind that made Ilyara's crest ridges ache from sustained involuntary elevation, but because of certainty. She had been certain, with the deep structural certainty that comes from 11 years of peer-reviewed work and 2 ministry awards, that the human was going to die. Not a question of if. A question of which feeding cycle, which morning approach, which casual 2-word greeting would finally trigger the response that every data point in Ilyara's career said was inevitable. She pulled up the early field notes sometimes, late at night in the station's data lab, scrolling through entries she had dictated in a voice she barely recognized, clipped, certain, professionally furious. Day 12. The human has entered Pen 7 without authorization for the 3rd time this week. I have filed a formal complaint with the station director. The director states that the human's placement was approved by the Kalori Frontier Bureau as a cross-species behavioral consultant. I have requested the human's professional credentials. They consist of 17 years of livestock work on a planet called Montana. This is not a credential. This is a location. I have noted this distinction in my complaint. Day 14. The human has started leaving grain strips on a flat stone inside the pen. The bull has eaten them. The bull has never accepted food from any source other than live prey. I tested the grain strips for chemical additives. Clean. The human simply left food and walked away, and the bull simply ate it. 11 years of approach protocols, drone-delivered nutrient supplements, and pressure-activated feeding stations, and this human accomplished more with a jacket pocket full of grain than my entire equipment budget. Day 19. The human is feeding the bull by hand. By hand. She holds the grain strip flat on her palm and the bull takes it with the front of its jaw, gently, the way a creature with 900 kilograms of bite force has no physiological reason to do anything. She smells of grain, animal hair, and that dark beverage she carries in a metal cup at all hours. I have no explanation for this. I resent it professionally. Day 23. The human sat inside the pen for 4 hours today. She brought a small handheld reading device. The bull slept. I monitored its vital signs remotely, heart rate at resting baseline, cortisol suppressed, quill crest completely flat. The most dangerous land predator on this continent slept 3 meters from a human reading what appears to be a detective novel. I have no category for this event. I have created a new log classification, uncategorized proximity event. I expect to use it frequently. Day 26. I told the human she was going to die. I presented my data, 11 years of field observations, the casualty statistics, the 3 abandoned programs, the survey fence. She listened to all of it, nodded once, and said, probably. Then she asked if I wanted some coffee. I declined. I do not know what coffee is, and I have no interest in learning. Day 29. The human brought a brush, a physical brush, the kind used for grooming domesticated animals on mammalian biology worlds. She brushed burrs out of the bull's quill line for 45 minutes. The bull leaned into the brush strokes. Its pupils were at maximum dilation. The resting content response I have observed exactly 0 times in 11 years of study. I recorded the entire session. I have watched the recording 3 times. Each time I notice something new that should not be possible. Day 31. The bull allowed the human to touch its jaw ridge. Contact duration, 4 seconds. Direct tactile contact with the mandibular bone plate. which in every other recorded interaction has been the primary strike surface. The bull's pupils dilated to resting calm during contact. This is the first recorded tactile interaction between a Gravethorn and any sentient species that did not result in a casualty report. I have amended my complaint to the station director to note that while the human's methods remain irregular, the results are, I find no adequate term. Unprecedented is insufficient. Day 33, I have withdrawn my complaint. I am watching. Day 38. The bull follows the human to the compound gate each evening when she returns to her quarters. It stands at the fence line and does not move until she is inside. Then it walks back to the center of the pen, lies down, and faces her building. I have observed this for 5 consecutive evenings. The bull has never displayed any behavior consistent with sentinel positioning toward a specific individual. I do not know what to call this. Guarding is anthropomorphic. Territorial surveillance of a bonded stimulus is technically accurate and somehow worse. I will settle on post-proximity orientation and move on. Day 42. The human spoke to me today. Not about the project, about the bull. She said it reminds her of a horse she had on Montana, a stallion that had thrown 4 riders and bitten a veterinarian badly enough to require reconstructive surgery. She said her grandmother walked into its paddock on the 3rd day, stood in the center, and waited. The stallion walked to her. She said her grandmother told her the trick was that there was no trick. You just have to mean it when you stand still. I asked her what that meant. She said, if you have to ask, you're not still enough yet. I found this unhelpful. I have also been thinking about it for 3 hours. Ilyara closed the log and sat back in her current seat on the observation platform's lower step. She had been so certain. Not out of malice. She had never wished Marin harm. Not once. Not even during the nights when she lay awake imagining the morning she would have to dictate a casualty report. But out of 11 years of data that said this was what happened. You approached a Gravethorn. The Gravethorn killed you. You could do it carefully from 40 meters with a shielded drone, or you could do it recklessly from 3 meters with dried grain and a detective novel. But the outcome was the same. The data was clean. The conclusion was unavoidable. Except the data had never included a variable like Marin Cade. And the conclusion, it turned out, was not a conclusion at all. It was a limitation. The present reasserted itself with a sound like a small engine idling. One of the cubs, the middle one, the male with the darker quills Marin had started calling Soot, on his 3rd day of life, had climbed onto the human's knee and was gnawing on the reinforced cuff of her work jacket. Marin peeled the fabric free gently, handed the cub a dried grain strip instead, and Soot settled into her lap with the contented bonelessness of a creature that had never in its brief existence been given a reason to feel unsafe. He weighed 19 kilos. Ilyara had weighed him 2 days ago. He was climbing fast. "Hey, Doc," Marin called without looking up. She always knew when Ilyara was watching. Some human faculty that operated below the threshold of calori sensory instrumentation, not supernatural. Ilyara reminded herself, just different. A predator species awareness of being observed. You going to come say hello, or are you going to stand out there taking notes until your feet go numb? My feet do not go numb. I have thermal regulation in my extremities. Then you're standing out there by choice. Which is worse? Marin glanced over her shoulder and grinned. It was the same grin she gave the Gravethorns, easy, unhurried, no performance in it, no teeth showing, no challenge and no submission. Just a face saying, I see you and I'm glad you're here. Come on, bring your recorder. The little one's doing something new. The little one. That was the female, the runt. The one with the pale quills and the oversized amber eyes that Marin had named Dusty on her 2nd day of life, and that Ilyara had refused to call anything other than Specimen C for 3 weeks before she caught herself murmuring Dusty into a field note at 200 and had to delete the entire entry. She re-recorded it as Specimen C. It took her 4 attempts because the name kept sliding back in. Ilyara walked to the pen gate. The bull's open eye tracked her, Not with hostility, not anymore, but with the attentive patience of a creature that had decided she was permitted and was monitoring the parameters of that permission. The dam's quills rattled once, a warning, not a charge posture, not an escalation, just a precise acknowledgement that the number of bodies in the pen was about to increase by one, and the dam had noted it. Ilyara stopped. Her hand was on the gate latch. Her crest ridges were elevated. She breathed. "You're fine," Marin said quietly. Not a command. A fact. The same tone she used with the bull when it ground its jaw at a passing survey drone. The same steady calm that Ilyara had spent 9 months trying to measure and 9 months failing. "Walk slow. Don't look directly at the dam. Look at me." Ilyara looked at Marin. She opened the gate. She walked. The dam's quills settled 2 steps and Ilyara counted, because she was a scientist and counting was what she did when her hands shook. The bull did not move. Ilyara reached the flat stone and sat down beside the human with a care that probably looked absurd from any observation angle, lowering herself centimeter by centimeter. Her recorder clutched in both hands. Her crest, ridges flat against her skull in a submission posture she had not consciously chosen and could not bring herself to correct. Dusty looked up from the dirt, blinked at Ilyara with those enormous amber eyes and sneezed. "See," Marin said, "she likes you." That was a respiratory reflex triggered by particulate inhalation, not a social signal. "That's what you said about soot purring, and about the bull lying down when I hum, and about the dam letting me check her cub's teeth last week, and about Ridge pressing against my leg during the electrical storm." Marin scratched soot behind the quill line, and the cub made the purring sound again. That idling engine rumble that Ilyara still had no satisfactory neurological classification for, despite 11 separate spectral analyses and 2 consultation requests to the ministry's acoustics division. "At some point, Doc, you're going to run out of ways to call affection a reflex." Ilyara opened her mouth to respond with something precise and clinically dismissive. Dusty climbed onto her knee. The cub weighed 8 kilos. Its hide was warm, warmer than Ilyara had expected, warmer than ambient, warmer than any calorie body temperature by a measurable margin that she noted automatically even as the rest of her cognitive architecture stuttered. The quills lay flat against its back, soft as the down feathers of a nesting bird. The oversized eyes blinked up at her once, then closed. Dusty curled into a tight ball on Ilyara's thigh and went completely still, and the warmth of the cub's small body pressed against Ilyara's lab coat like a statement that required no data to support it. Ilyara did not move, she did not breathe, she looked at Marin. Marin was watching her with an expression Ilyara had catalogued in 6 previous field notes and still could not name. Something between amusement and gentleness. Something warm and patient. Something that had no equivalent in the calorie emotional taxonomy and that she suspected might require inventing a new classification for. "Just hold still," Marin said softly. "She picked you, don't overthink it." The dual timeline folded in on itself after that. Past and present stopped being separate categories in Ilyara's notes and became a single continuous variable. The trajectory of a certainty collapsing, day by day, field note by field note, one impossible observation at a time. She pulled up the old entries less to study them and more to marvel at the distance between who she had been and who the data was turning her into. Day 40, when she had called Marin reckless and the human had said, "Yeah, probably that too," and gone back to brushing burrs out of the bull's quill line with that kitchen-grade grooming brush. Day 55, when the bull had charged a survey drone that flew too close and Marin had stepped between the bull and the wreckage. Not to protect the drone. Nobody cared about the drone. It was the ministry's 3rd replacement, and they had stopped express shipping them. But to calm the bull, one hand flat on its jaw ridge, murmuring words Ilyara couldn't hear from the platform, and the 9-foot Category 9 apex predator had stopped mid-lun and lowered its head until its crest touched the ground. That was the day Ilyara had stopped filing complaints and started filing research amendments. Day 68. I have revised my classification framework. The Gravethorn does not appear to operate on a simple predator-threat model when in proximity to this human. The human's behavioral signature, I am beginning to call it calm sovereignty, though the term is imprecise and will require peer review, seems to register as something the Gravethorn recognizes at a neurological level below learned behavior. The bull does not tolerate the human. The bull defers to the human. These are not the same response. I have been wrong about which one I was observing. This error invalidates portions of my day 1 through 33 analysis. I am revising. Day 90. The bull follows the human when she leaves the pen. Not aggressively, not protectively in the conventional sense, though the distinction may be academic given what the bull is capable of doing to anything that approached the human with hostile intent. It simply walks behind her, matching her pace, its quills flat, its jaw closed. The field hands no longer run when this happens. They have started calling the bull's behavior the shadow walk. I disapprove of colloquial terminology in field science. I have also used the term 3 times in my own notes this week, and once in a subspace message to my department chair, who responded with a single glyph that I believe translates as really. I will address this inconsistency at a later date. Day 112. The dam is pregnant. This should not be possible under current models. The literature is unambiguous. Gravethorns do not breed in proximity to sentient species. The stress hormone cascade triggered by non-Gravethorn biological signatures within 600 meters suppresses the dam's reproductive cycling completely. This is established science. This is documented endocrinology. This is my own published work, cited 43 times, taught in 2 Kalori universities and referenced in the ministry's containment manual. And yet, I have triple-checked the scan. I have run the hormone panel twice. The dam is pregnant. Her stress hormones are at the lowest levels I have ever recorded in a wild Gravethorn female. She chose to den within 40 meters of the human's quarters. I am revising my second published paper. This will require a formal retraction of 2 core claims. My department chair will not be pleased. I find, after considerable reflection, that I do not care. Day 130. The human has begun humming to the dam, not singing, a melody without words, something low and steady, something from her home planet. The dam's quills go flat when she does this. The dam's cortisol drops 11% within 90 seconds of the humming's onset. I have measured this 4 times across 4 separate sessions. The dam permits the human to sit within 2 meters during active denning preparation, closer than the dam permits me, and I have been on this station for 11 years. I am running out of amendments to file and out of ways to describe what I am seeing without using words the ministry would flag as subjective. Day 156. The cubs were born at 3:40, 2 males and a female. The dam permitted the human to be present inside the den space during the birth. The dam did not permit me. I watched from the observation platform via thermal imaging and remote biometric feeds, 40 meters out, the closest the dam's tolerance would allow. The human was the first non-Gravethorn sentient to witness a live Gravethorn birth in recorded history. She did not record it. She did not photograph it. She did not make notes. She sat quietly with her hands in her lap and the bull lying at her back, and she watched. And when it was over and all 3 cubs were nursing, she walked out of the den and told me, 3. They're all healthy. The little girl has light quills. Then she went inside and made coffee. I have never envied a human before. I envied her then. Not for the access, though the access was extraordinary, but for the ease of it. The way she could witness something no Kalori scientist had ever seen and respond to it not with data but with presence. As though being there was enough. As though being there was the point. Marin was not a scientist. She said this often, usually while doing something that made Ilyara's scientific framework buckle and groan at the seams. I don't know why they trust me, she told Ilyara one evening, sitting on the porch of the station house while the bull lay in the yard like a geological formation, and the cubs played in the dust, and the dam watched from the den entrance with her quills at rest. I've never known. My grandmother was the same way. She could walk into a field full of range bulls back home, the kind that had put 3 hands in the hospital that same year, and they'd all just settle. Like someone turned the volume down on the whole field. No technique to it. No trick. That is not a scientific explanation. No, Marin shrugged, but it works. It did work, and it was working in ways that the data alone could not capture. Ridge, the largest cub, the quiet one, had begun displaying a behavior that Ilyara had initially classified as pathological and now classified as extraordinary. At 6 weeks old, the cub had started positioning itself between Marin and any unfamiliar sound or movement in the compound. Not the bull's position. The bull stayed behind Marin, a wall at her back. Not the dam's position. The dam flanked, watching the periphery. Ridge took the forward position, front and center, facing the direction of the unknown. The cub was 8 weeks old and already running a defensive protocol that matched adult Gravethorn pack guard behavior documented in wild populations. Behavior that, according to every developmental timeline Ilyara had ever published, should not emerge until the cub was at minimum 6 months old and had been socially integrated into an established adult pack structure. Ridge had skipped 5 months of developmental milestones, not because the cub was precocious, because the cub had a reason to guard. Field note, day 4339. Ilyara had murmured that evening, watching Ridge take position between Marin's stone and a field drone that was running a perimeter sweep. The cub's bone plates had locked, a defensive calcification response that was supposed to take months to develop. The quills were half raised. The amber eyes tracked the drone with the flat patience of something that was deciding whether this object constituted a threat to the human behind it. Specimen B is displaying accelerated social defense maturation, consistent with, I have no model for this, consistent with being raised by someone worth protecting. She had deleted that last phrase from the official record. She had not deleted it from memory. It did work. And that was the part that kept Ilyara awake at night, cycling through her data, scrolling through 11 years of studies that now read like an extended argument with a conclusion she had never been brave enough to consider. The Kalori scientific model demanded mechanism, a pheromone, a frequency, a postural cue, something measurable and reproducible that explained why a Category 9 apex predator would lie down and close its eyes in the presence of a 57-kilo human with no armor, no weapon, no clearance, no credentials, and jacket pockets full of dried grain strips. She had tested for pheromones, negative across all spectral bands. She had tested for subsonics. Inconclusive. The human hummed sometimes, but the frequencies were well within normal mammalian biological range and did not match any known Gravethorn social signal in the literature. She had tested for postural dominance cues, microexpression threat patterns, gait cadence analysis, thermal output differentials, and biometric stress markers. Nothing. Nothing that would register on a Gravethorn sensory array as anything other than an unremarkable mammalian presence. She had tested for 73 separate variables over 9 months, run each test 3 to 5 times, consulted 2 off-world acoustic specialists and 1 Kalori behavioral neurologist, and the answer kept returning the same flat line. There was no mechanism. There was only Marin. Field note, day 4347, addendum, Ilyara dictated, watching Dusty sleep on her knee while the bull's shadow stretched across the pen in the late afternoon light. I am beginning to suspect that the variable I have been searching for is not biochemical, biomechanical, or acoustic. It is behavioral. The human does not dominate the Gravethorn. She does not submit to it. She does not negotiate with it or condition it or manage it through any technique I recognize. She exists beside it, as though occupying the same ecological tier is the most natural arrangement in the universe, as though it requires no justification, no posturing, no accommodation. The Gravethorn appears to agree. I have no precedent for this response in Kalori literature. I am not certain I have precedent for it in any literature, in any language, from any species that has ever attempted to study this animal. She paused the recorder, looked at Marin, who was feeding Soot another grain strip with one hand and scratching Ridge behind the ear with the other, while the third cub, Dusty, slept on a Kalori scientist's lap, as though this were the most ordinary den in the valley. "What is that sound you make, the humming?" "A song my grandmother used to sing. Don't know the words anymore, just the melody. She used to sing it in the barn when the mares were foaling, said it kept them calm." Do the Gravethorns respond to it specifically, different from other auditory stimuli? Soot falls asleep, every time within about 2 minutes. The bull's quills go flat, I can see it happening. The whole crest settles like grass lying down. Dusty, Marin looked at the cub in Ilyara's lap and her expression softened. Dusty just breathes slower. You can feel it if you put your hand on her ribs. Ilyara could feel it. Dusty's ribcage was rising and falling under her palm in a rhythm that had synchronized with the human's humming, one breath for every 4 notes, steady as a chemical oscillator, precise as something designed. She added this to her notes with a clinical detachment that masked the fact that her hand was trembling and had been for 2 minutes. There was one more entry from that period that Ilyara returned to more than any other. Day 271, the night of the storm. An electromagnetic discharge event had swept the valley, the kind that happened 3 or 4 times a year on this continent, when the charged mineral deposits in the northern ranges released accumulated static in a cascading atmospheric discharge. The lightning was not Earth lightning. It was wider, slower, a crawling lattice of blue-white energy that illuminated the valley in pulses and made every metal surface on the station hum. The cubs were terrified. Ilyara could hear them from the data lab high-frequency distress calls, the kind that in wild Gravethorn populations triggered the dam's defense aggression response and made approach by any non-pack member a lethal proposition. She activated the pen's remote monitoring feeds and watched from the platform terminal. What she saw made her stop the recording, restart it, and verify the timestamp 3 times. Marin was in the den. She was sitting against the far wall with the bull on one side and the dam on the other, both adults flanking her, their quills flat, their bodies curved inward to form a living alcove around the human. All 3 cubs were in Marin's lap. All 3. Soot was pressed against her chest, his dark quills trembling with each discharge. Ridge was on her left thigh, his bone plates locked but his head tucked under Marin's arm. Dusty was curled against Marin's stomach, with her face buried in the fabric of the human's jacket. Marin was humming the grandmother's song, low and steady and unwavering through the crackling discharge, and the strobing light, and the deep tectonic rumble of charged mineral deposits releasing their load into the sky. The bull's eyes were closed, the dam's quills were flat, the cub's distress calls had stopped. The entire den, 2 Category 9 apex predators and 3 cubs, was arranged around one human woman in a configuration that could only be described as a family sheltering from a storm. The most dangerous creatures on the continent had placed themselves around the gentlest thing in the valley and gone still. Ilyara had watched for 40 minutes. She had not taken a single note during that time. Afterward in the data lab, she had dictated the entry with a clinical precision that she could hear cracking at the edges. The pack's storm response behavior is inconsistent with all documented Gravethorn threat reaction models. In wild populations, electromagnetic events trigger dispersal and aggressive perimeter defense. In this instance, the pack consolidated around the human. The human is not shelter. The human is not armored. The human is a 57-kilo mammal sitting on dirt. And every creature in that den, including 2 individuals capable of destroying reinforced survey equipment, chose her over distance, over aggression, over 9 million years of instinct. I am no longer confident that instinct is the correct word for what I am observing. That entry had been the turning point, not the birth, not the jaw-ridge touch, not the first grain strip accepted from an open palm. The storm. The storm was when Ilyara stopped being a researcher who was documenting a phenomenon and became a researcher who was part of one. The crisis came on day 309, and it came fast enough that Ilyara's early warning instruments registered it before her eyes processed the shape dropping through the cloud ceiling. A Kalori enforcement shuttle, unmarked, running without transponder, hull reflections damped to reduce visual acquisition from ground-level observation, dropped into the valley at dawn. Ilyara was on the observation platform running overnight data compilations when the proximity alert screamed across the compound speakers. She recognized the hull markings before the shuttle's landing struts deployed. Ministry of Biological Containment. Not her Ministry of Science. The other ministry. The one with the stun netting and the chemical sedation protocols, and the standing bureaucratic authority to reclassify any creature on any frontier holding as a containment risk and remove it by force. 4 officers came down the ramp in full tactical suppression gear, sealed helmets with UV visors, compression rod launchers braced on hip mounts, shockwebbing dispensers mounted on forearm rails. Behind them walked a senior administrator Ilyara recognized from a single funding review 3 years prior, and had immediately disliked for reasons she could now articulate with cold precision. Director Torvan. He was thin, sharp-featured, and he carried his data tablet the way some species carried edged weapons, as a thing that made him right regardless of the evidence. Dr. Vess. He did not look at her. He was looking at Pen 7. We've received multiple reports of an uncontrolled Category 9 breeding event on this holding. 3 unregistered cubs, unbonded to any licensed Kalori handler, in direct proximity to a non-cleared xenospecies civilian. We're here to collect them. They are bonded, Ilyara said. She heard her voice as though from a distance, steady, clear, the product of 11 years of delivering field reports to indifferent committees. Her crest ridges, however, were at full elevation. To the human. Humans cannot hold xenofauna bonds under Kalori Statute 4.7. She has no containment clearance, no behavioral training certification, no species-specific interaction license, and no standing with any Kalori regulatory body. Torvan tapped his tablet twice, each tap precise. The 3 cubs will be removed to the containment center at Veldros for registration and assignment to a licensed handler. The breeding pair will be sedated and relocated to a ministry-controlled habitat with appropriate buffer zones. The human will be reassigned off-world. Director, the breeding pair denned here specifically because of the human's presence. If you remove her, the pair will. I am aware of your research notes, Dr. Vess. I've read your amended papers. I've also read your original papers, the ones you've retracted. His voice carried the precise blade of a bureaucrat who had discovered he could weaponize someone's intellectual honesty against them. I find your recent conclusions premature, your methodology compromised by proximity bias, and your terminology, calm sovereignty, to be editorializing dressed as science. You've gone native, Doctor. It happens to field researchers. The corrective is straightforward. He looked past her toward the pen. Step aside. The officers moved toward Pen 7 in a practice spread formation. 2 flanked the gate. 2 moved to the far fence to establish a crossfire angle with the shockwebbing launchers. One of them tested the launcher's charge indicator, a small blue light that blinked twice in the early morning air. Marin was already standing. She had heard the shuttle. Ilyara realized later that Marin always heard things before the instruments caught up, some human faculty for threat detection that operated below conscious processing, a legacy of whatever evolutionary pressures had built her species on that distant world they called Earth. She was standing at the center of the pen with soot in the crook of her left arm and Dusty pressed against her ankle and ridge. The quiet one, the largest, the one whose pronounced bone plate along its spine was now fully calcified into a solid ridge, and whose quills had reached the length of a grown Calori's forearm, sitting upright at her right side with its quills at half raise, its amber eyes wide open. The bull was behind her, the dam was to her left. Neither had been in those positions 30 seconds ago. They had repositioned when the shuttle's ramp dropped, moving without sound, without visible signal from the human, without any behavioral cue that Ilyara's platform instruments detected. One moment they were resting, the next they were in formation. The lead officer stopped at the gate. "Ma'am," he called through the fence mesh, "we have a ministry removal order for 3 unregistered Category 9 cubs. Please step away from the animals and clear the pen." Marin didn't move. She looked at the officer the way she looked at the bull, steady, calm, no urgency and no fear, no posture that could be read as challenge or submission, just presence, just the still certainty of a woman standing exactly where she intended to stand. "They're not animals," she said, her voice carried across the yard without effort, "and I'm not stepping anywhere." The bull rose. It did not charge, it did not roar, it did not display threat posture. It simply stood up, all 9 feet and 2,000 pounds of calcified bone plate and black quill and jaw that shears axles clean through, and looked at the officers through the fence mesh. Its jaw cracked open, not in threat, in presentation. The grinding sound rolled across the compound, low enough to vibrate in Ilyara's sternum and rattle the data tablet in Torvan's hand 40 meters away, and send a tremor through the morning air that the observation platform seismograph would later log as a 1.2 magnitude localized event. The dam's quills rattled, a sustained staccato that filled the pen like dry rain on stone. Ridge's quills fanned a full display for the first time in the cub's life, and the bone plates along its spine locked upward into a ridged armor line that made the 8-week-old look like a creature 3 times its age. Soot, in Marin's arms, turned its head to face the gate with a focus no cub that young should have been capable of, its dark quills erect, its amber eyes fixed on the lead officer with the flat attention of a predator species that was deciding whether to remember this face. Dusty pressed harder against Marin's ankle and growled. It was the first vocalization Ilyara had ever recorded from the runt, not a bark, not a whimper, but a sustained low-frequency declaration, a subharmonic pulse so deep and so steady that it registered on the platform's instruments as a geological tremor rather than a biological signal. The ground under the pen hummed with it. "Field note," Ilyara said, and she heard her own voice crack. "The pack has formed a defensive perimeter around the human. All 5 individuals, the bull, the dam, and 3 8-week-old cubs, are oriented outward from the human, facing the perceived threat. This is the first documented instance of Gravethorn collective defense behavior incorporating a non-Gravethorn species at the protected center of the formation. The human did not command this. She did not signal for it. She is the protected center because they chose her to be." Director Torvan was staring at the pen. His tablet was at his side, screen dark, forgotten. The officers had not moved. The youngest one, the one whose visor had been up, had taken 3 slow steps backward and appeared to be undergoing a fundamental revaluation of every professional choice that had brought him to this valley on this morning. Marin scratched soot behind the quill line. The cub purred. The bull's jaw closed slowly, the grinding faded, the vibration died, but the formation held. 5 bodies arranged around one human, quills raised, eyes outward, every calcified plate and every amber eye broadcasting a message in a language older than speech. "She is ours." "Director Torvan," Ilyara said. She stepped off the observation platform and walked across the yard toward him. Her legs were not steady. Her crest ridges were at full elevation and trembling with the effort of staying there. Dusty's subharmonic growl ran through the ground beneath her feet like a second pulse. I am invoking Article 12 of the Frontier Science Charter. Active research subjects displaying an unprecedented behavioral event during an ongoing observation program cannot be relocated, sedated, or removed without the principal investigator's written consent. I am the principal investigator of record for holding Kesara 7. These are my research subjects. You do not have my consent. Your research subjects include a human civilian with no. My research subjects include a human who has accomplished in 11 months what the Ministry of Biological Containment has failed to accomplish in 40 years of funded research and 12 containment programs. She held his gaze. She did not blink. Her crest ridges ached. She held them. A stable, reproducible, voluntary bond with a Category 9 apex predator, resulting in voluntary breeding in proximity to sentient species, which your ministry's own literature says cannot occur, resulting in pack formation, resulting in collective defense behavior. If you remove her, you do not merely lose a dataset director. You lose the only individual in the known galaxy who has achieved what your ministry's entire charter was written to study, and you lose the breeding pair. The bull's cardiac rhythm destabilizes under chemical sedation. I have the stress test data, which you are welcome to review. The dam will reject the den and abandon the cubs. The cubs will not survive without maternal nursing at this developmental stage. You will destroy, in a single morning, the most significant xenobiological discovery of our generation, because a statute written 40 years ago did not anticipate that a human with grain in her pockets could do what our entire species could not. She paused. I suggest you let the data speak, Director. It is considerably more persuasive than your tablet. The yard was silent. Dusty's subharmonic growl had not stopped. It pulsed through the ground like a heartbeat, steady and ancient. The bull breathed. The dam watched. The cubs held their positions around a woman who stood among them as though she had always been there, as though there had never been a fence between her and this family, as though the space she occupied had been waiting for her before the first Kelori shuttle had ever touched this continent. Torvald looked at the pen for a long time. Then he looked at Ilyara. "This is irregular," he said. "Yes," Ilyara said, "it is." He left. The shuttle lifted at 9:47. The officers walked up the ramp without looking back. The youngest one paused at the top, turned and looked at the pen one more time. Ilyara saw something on his face that she recognized from her own reflection 3 months ago. The expression of a professional whose certainty had just been taken apart by a woman with no credentials, and a song she didn't know the words to. The compound was quiet after the shuttle left. Quieter than it should have been. The field hands were still in the bunker. The perimeter alarm was still cycling from the earlier motion grid disruption, and the observation platform seismograph was still logging the residual subharmonic from Dusty's growl, which had continued for 11 minutes after the shuttle lifted, and then stopped with the abruptness of a switch being thrown. In the pen, the formation dissolved slowly. The bull was the last to lower its quills, a full 3 minutes after the shuttle cleared the valley's rim, as though the creature was tracking the vehicle's engine signature long after Ilyara's instruments lost it. The dam walked a perimeter circuit, checking the fence line, rattling her quills at each post. Ridge's bone plates unlocked with an audible click that carried across the yard. Soot climbed out of Marin's arms and sat at her feet, looking up at her face as though waiting for an instruction that had not yet been spoken. Dusty was the one who did not move. The runt stayed pressed against Marin's ankle, her pale quills flat, her amber eyes open and watchful, her small body oriented toward the pen gate where the officers had stood. She stayed that way for 20 minutes. Then she walked to the far corner of the pen, dug a shallow depression in the dirt, and lay down in it facing the gate. Ilyara logged this later as sustained post-threat vigilance behavior in a juvenile specimen. She did not log the part where she watched the runt lying in that self-dug depression, eyes on the gate, and felt something in her chest that was not professional attachment, and was not academic concern, and was not any of the 14 calorie words for any kind of relationship she had been trained to recognize. It was fear. Specifically, the fear of someone who has almost lost something, and is only now understanding what that something is. Marin found Ilyara on the observation platform an hour later. The adrenaline had drained and taken something structural with it. Ilyara was sitting on the deck with her back against the railing, her recorder in her lap, her crest ridges trembling in a post-stress autonomic pattern she could not override. "Hey," Marin sat down beside her, close enough that Ilyara could feel the warmth of the human's body, which ran hotter than any calorie and which she had stopped finding uncomfortable somewhere around month 4. "That thing you did, the article, the speech." Article 12. It was the correct procedural invocation for an unauthorized removal action during. "You were shaking." Calorie crest ridges respond involuntarily to elevated cortisol levels. And "You were shaking," Marin said again, quieter, "and you did it anyway." "That's not a procedural response, Doc. That's something else." Ilyara was quiet for a long time. Below them, the bull had settled back beside the flat stone, its quills flat, its jaw closed, its massive body curled around nothing in particular, no, not nothing. Curled around the space where Marin usually sat, holding it warm and open and ready. The dam was nursing the cubs in the den alcove. Dusty had climbed onto Ridge's back and was chewing on the larger cub's ear, and Ridge was tolerating it with the ancient patience of a sibling, who had already run the calculation and determined that resistance would cost more energy than endurance. "I did not want them taken," Ilyara said finally. "I know. Not because of the data. Not because of the research value or the publication implications or the career trajectory. I did not want them taken because," she stopped. The calorie language had 14 words for professional attachment, 6 for academic loyalty, and none, she was discovering with a precision that felt like loss for what she was trying to say. "Because they are here, and I am here, and you are here. And this is the place where the data says none of us should be standing together. And it is also the only place in 11 years of field work where I have understood what I was studying." She had spent 11 years classifying everything in this valley. Every behavior had a code. Every interaction had a category. Every response had a precedent in the literature or a note explaining why no precedent existed. She had built a career on the belief that understanding something meant measuring it, that knowledge was data, and data was sufficient, and anything that could not be measured was not real enough to matter. Dusty had climbed onto her knee and shattered that belief in 8 kilos of warm hide and flat quills. Marin didn't speak for a moment. Then she reached over and put her hand on Ilyara's forearm, warm, steady, unhurried. The same hand that touched the bull's jaw ridge. The same calm that made the dam's quills settle and the cub's purr and a 9-foot predator lower its head to the ground. "You know," Marin said, "back home, we have a word for someone who stands between a predator and a threat because she doesn't want the predator taken away." "What is the word?" "Family." Ilyara's recorder was still running. It captured the silence that followed, the kind of silence that is not empty but full, the kind that holds everything it needs to hold, and the sound of Dusty sneezing in the den below, and the bull's quills settling to absolute flat, and Marin Cade drinking from her cup as the morning light crossed the valley and turned the Gravethorn's bone plates from slate gray to silver. The formal report went to the Ministry of Science 3 days later. Ilyara wrote it in the data lab at 300, with Dusty asleep in a padded sample crate beside her desk. The cub had started following her to the lab after the confrontation with Torvon, padding through the corridor on feet that were already too large for her body. And Ilyara had stopped pretending this was a problem somewhere around the second night, when she caught herself adjusting the crate's thermal lining to match the cub's preferred sleep temperature, and realized she had memorized that temperature without intending to. The report was 47 pages. She had never written anything this long, and she had never written anything this fast. The words came the way the bond had come, not forced, not constructed, but present, as though they had been waiting in her notes for 9 months and only needed the space to arrange themselves. It documented 9 months of continuous behavioral data, 17 instances of the bull deferring to the human, 12 instances of the dam permitting the human to handle cubs at contact distance, 4 instances of collective defense orientation, 1 instance of voluntary breeding in proximity to a sentient non-Gravethorn species, and 1 instance, logged without editorial, without commentary, without any of the 14 calorie words for professional attachment, of a calorie researcher being accepted into a Gravethorn pack's proximity tolerance perimeter, sitting on the stone, holding the runt, belonging. The final paragraph read, "The human behavioral signature that facilitates this bond does not correspond to any known mechanism in calorie xenobiological literature. It is not pheromonal, it is not subsonic, it is not postural, it is not reproducible through any technological or chemical means currently available. Preliminary classification, sovereign stillness, a state of behavioral composure so complete that it registers to the Gravethorn's threat assessment architecture as ecological equivalence rather than intrusion. The human is not perceived as predator, prey, competitor, or interloper. She is perceived as same. Recommendation: permanent station assignment for the human designate Marin Cade. Reclassification of holding Cassara 7 from containment research to bonded observation. Further study is not merely warranted. It is, in the investigators, considered professional opinion, 11 years overdue." She submitted it at 3:47. Then she picked up Dusty's crate, walked back to the compound through the pre-dawn dark, and sat on the flat stone in Pen 7 while the sky turned from black to the pale amber that this planet used instead of blue. The bull shifted to make room for her without opening its eyes. The dam's quills lay flat. Ridge pressed against Ilyara's hip and fell asleep. She did not log any of this. Marin came out at first light carrying 2 metal cups. She handed one to Ilyara without asking. Coffee. Ilyara drank it. She had learned to drink it over 3 months of mornings on this stone, and the taste had stopped being the point somewhere around week 6. The warmth was the point. The ritual was the point. The fact that someone had made it and brought it and sat down beside you, that was the point. You filed it. 47 pages. That's a lot of pages to say she's family. The ministry requires documentation. Uh-huh. Marin sat down on the stone. Soot climbed into her lap immediately. Ridge, asleep against Ilyara's hip, did not move. Dusty, curled in Ilyara's lap since she'd set the crate down, opened one amber eye, assessed the seating arrangement with the slow deliberation of a species that had spent 9 million years deciding what was worth moving for, and closed the eye again. She was already where she wanted to be. "She keeps choosing me," Ilyara said, looking down at the pale-quilled cub. "Yeah," Marin took a sip of her coffee, smiled. "She does." The bull yawned, a sound like a quarry wall collapsing in slow motion, deep enough to rattle the cups, and settled its massive head on its foreclaws. The dam stepped out of the den alcove and crossed the pen to lie in the first patch of warm light, her pale quills catching the sun and turning the color of dry grass. Ridge's bone plates caught the light and went copper at the edges. Soot purred in Marin's lap, a sound like a small, contented engine that had finally found its idle speed. The valley filled with light, the pen was quiet. 2 species that every published study, every containment protocol, every ministry directive said should never share a den sat together on a flat stone with 3 cubs arranged between them. And the only sound was Marin humming a song she didn't know the words to anymore. A melody from a barn on a planet called Montana, carried across the gap between stars by a woman with no credentials, and no clearance and no explanation that any instrument in any laboratory on any world could find. while a Kalori biologist held a predator cub in her arms and did not take a single note. She didn't need to. She already understood.